Do you think you have what it takes to solve the hardest grammar questions on the digital SAT? I'm Nathan Greenberg, founder of Ivy League Mentors. Over the past 15 years, I've helped thousands of students earn top scores on the SAT. For this video, I've selected 20 of the hardest questions to ever appear on the new digital version of the test. All of these questions are rated a 3 out of 3 in terms of difficulty by the College Board, and I've seen a lot of students struggle with them in the classes that I teach. So if you're up for a challenge, stick around. Question 1. During the American Civil War, Thomas Morris Chester braved the front lines as a war correspondent for the Philadelphia Press, amplifying the voices and experiences of black soldiers, blank, of particular importance to Chester, who later became an activist and lawyer during the post-war Reconstruction period. So anytime you see a verb in the blank, the first thing that you should do is to check the subject and make sure the subject and verb match in terms of number. In this case, that's a little bit difficult, but don't get confused by all the things that come between the subject and the verb. Voices, experiences, soldiers, none of these are the subject. The subject in this case is the first word in the sentence, amplifying, and a gerund subject, that's an ing form of the verb acting as a noun, is always singular, which means it requires a singular verb. Therefore, we can cut through all of the distractions and easily see that the correct answer has to be D, was. Question 2. In assessing the films of Japanese director Akira Kurosawa, blank have missed his equally deep engagement with Japanese artistic traditions such as no theater. Now this question also uses a very common pattern. Anytime you see a phrase at the beginning of a sentence, followed by a comma and then a blank, remember that the thing that goes in the blank must be whatever the phrase is describing. So ask ourselves this question: who or what is assessing the films of this director? And the only possible answer is that the critics are doing it. The critics are assessing the films, which means that the critics have to go immediately after the comma. And the only answer that satisfies this criterion is A. Many critics have focused. Again, this is one of the most common patterns on the SAT, so anytime that you see it, pay close attention to who or what the phrase is describing. Question 3. A recent study tracked the number of bee species present in 27 New York apple orchards over a 10-year period. Blank found that when the wild growth near an orchard was cleared, the number of different bee species visiting the orchard decreased. Now in this case, it's pretty clear that what we need to focus on is punctuation, because all of the answers are the same except for that. Now a lot of students get confused when it comes to punctuating names and titles, but the rules are actually fairly simple, except for a few rare situations, and this is not one of them. A name is considered essential information and should not be set aside with any punctuation, which means that the correct answer is going to be C, the one with no punctuation. Question 4. The haiku-like poems of Thomas T., which present nature and dream-influenced images in crisp, spare language, have earned the Swedish poet praise from leading contemporary blank, them Nigerian-American essayist and novelist Teju Cole, who has written that T's work contain a luminous simplicity. Now again, because the only thing that's different about the answer choices is punctuation, it's pretty clear that that's what we need to focus on. And when you see a punctuation question about something in the middle of a sentence, one of the main things that you need to do is to check both sides and to see whether you have a complete sentence or not. Now in this case, from the beginning of the sentence up until writers, we do have a complete sentence. And if you're having trouble seeing it, it can help to remove all the non-essential information in the middle. When we do that, the sentence becomes, the haiku-like poems of Thomas T. have earned the Swedish poet praise from leading contemporary writers. Then we check what's going on in the second half of the sentence, among them all the way to the end. And we can see that we don't have a complete sentence. Instead, we're introducing a phrase. And most kinds of phrases, if they come at the end of a sentence, require a comma before them, which means that the correct answer is going to be D. Question 5. The artistic talents of Barbara Chase Ribot, most known for her 1979 historical novel Sally Hemings and the conversation it inspired, blank, limited to the realm of prose. She first excelled in sculpture, where her affinity for bronze, a material she described as timeless due to its use across eras and cultures, became part of her artistic identity. Now, as I said before, whenever you have a verb in the blank, the first thing that you should do is to check the subject and make sure it matches in terms of number. Now, in this case, that can be a little bit difficult because we have a long, non-essential phrase separating the subject from the verb. Another complication is the phrase of Barbara Chase Ribot, which is a prepositional phrase and can't be the subject, but may confuse many students. However, if we cut beyond that, we can see that the actual subject is the artistic talents, which is plural, and that means we're going to need a plural verb. So the correct answer has to be D, aren't. While I'm on the subject, let me share one little pro tip. When it comes to verbs, the most common issue to come up on the SAT is subject-verb agreement. Although verb tense can matter, in 9 out of 10 cases it doesn't. That means if you see 3 singular verbs and 1 plural verb, or 3 plural verbs and 1 singular verb, the correct answer is almost always going to be the one that doesn't match. Question 6. Working from an earlier discovery of C's, chemist E.C. and J.D., winners of the 2020 Nobel Prize in Chemistry, recreated and then reprogrammed the so-called genetic scissors of a species of DNA-cleaving bacteria, blank, a tool that is revolutionizing the field of gene technology. Now, this is a case where, in my experience, most students are going to pick answer B, but that's a trap. Now, it would be okay to end this sentence with the phrase, forging a tool that is revolutionizing the field of gene technology. But if we did that, it would be a non-essential phrase, and it would require a comma before it. If we use the word forging without a comma, as in answer B, it would imply that the bacteria are forging a tool, which is not what we want to say. Answer C could be tempting too, because the past form, forged, could appear to be the same structure as an earlier verb in the sentence, reprogrammed. However, if we are using 2 verbs for the same subject, they would need to be separated with the word and, which is not what we have here. And although answer D does give us the word and, the word forging would not need to be preceded by an and because there's no other ing form that comes before it. So the correct answer must be A, to forge. Remember that the infinitive form can be used to indicate purpose. So basically, this sentence is saying that they're reprogramming the genetic scissors with the purpose of forging this tool. Question 7. Rabanal Achi is a pre-colonial Maya dance drama performed annually in Rabanal, a town in the Guatemalan highlands. Based on events that occurred when Rabanal was a city-state ruled by a king, blank, had once been an ally of the king, but was later captured while leading an invading force against him. Now, this is a pattern that we've already discussed. We have a sentence that begins with a phrase followed by a comma and then a blank. And in this situation, it's important to consider who or what the phrase is describing, because that's what needs to come next. Well, the only plausible answer is the drama, Rabanal Achi. A person can't be based on something, nor can a military leader, nor can the word there, which means that the correct answer has to be A. Rabanal Achi tells. Question 8. To serve local families during the Great Depression, innovative New York City librarian Pura Del Pre offered storytelling in both English and Spanish, an uncommon blank, celebrated El Dia de los Tres Reyes Magos, an important community holiday, and put on puppet shows dramatizing Puerto Rican folktales. Now, this is another case where the answer choices are identical except for punctuation, which means that's what we need to focus on. And to determine the punctuation that's needed in this case, it helps to take a step back and analyze the structure of the sentence. If we look at this sentence as it's written, there's something that may strike us as very unusual. Near the end of the sentence, we see a semicolon. And in most cases, a semicolon needs to be separated by complete sentences on both sides. But after the semicolon, we don't see a complete sentence. We just see a phrase, and put on puppet shows dramatizing Puerto Rican folktales. And there is one other important semicolon usage that can come up on the digital SAT. In fact, I made a whole video on it if you're interested. Basically, semicolons can also be used to separate items in a complex list. That's a list in which the items in the list themselves contain commas. If we were to separate the items with commas in this case, it would be very confusing to our readers, which is why semicolons are used instead. So because we see that we have a complex list with the items separated by semicolons, all we need to do to solve this question is to figure out what the items in the list are. The list appears to be giving us 3 things that this librarian did. The first thing is that she offered storytelling in both English and Spanish, an uncommon practice at the time. And the second thing is that she celebrated El Dia de los Tres Reyes Magos, which means we need to separate those 2 things with a semicolon. And the only answer that puts the semicolon in the correct place is B. Question 9. When they were first discovered in Australia in 1798, duck-billed beaver-tailed platypuses so defied categorization that one scientist assigned them the name OP, paradoxical bird snout. The animal, which lays eggs but also nurses blank, young with milk, has since been classified as belonging to the monotrams group. Now, whenever you see that the blank contains a pronoun, the first thing that you're going to want to do is to check the antecedent. That's the noun that the pronoun refers to. And in this case, the antecedent is which, and which stands for the animal, which is singular. That means that we can automatically cross off answers A and B. Now, between C and D, it's important to remember that the possessive form of a pronoun doesn't use an apostrophe. it' means it is, which doesn't make sense in this case because we're looking for the possessive form, the one belonging to it. And that means that the correct answer is going to be C. Question 10. In addition to advocating for South America's independence in 2 political treatises, the Cartagena Manifesto and the Letter from Jamaica, Simón Bolívar personally led armies against the Spanish, liberating 3 South American territories: New Granada, present-day Colombia and Panama, Venezuela, and Quito, present-day blank from colonial rule. Now again, whenever you see answer choices where the words themselves are the same, what you need to focus on is punctuation, so that's what we're going to do. First, we've introduced a parenthetical phrase, which we need to close, but that doesn't help us very much because all of our answers include another parenthesis to close that phrase. However, if we look back further, we will also see that we've introduced another non-essential phrase, beginning with the word New Granada. From New Granada up until Ecuador is non-essential. We could take it out and the sentence would make sense. Liberating 3 South American territories from colonial rule. Now, because this non-essential phrase is introduced with a dash, it's important that we're consistent and also close it with a dash, and that means that the answer is going to be D. Now, for those of you who have been counting, you may have noticed that we're halfway through. But before we move on to the next question, a quick public service announcement. I'm pleased to announce the release of our new textbook, Digital SAT Reading and Writing, the ultimate guide. We've scrutinized all the trends to develop a unique approach that will help you master even the hardest questions on the reading and writing section of the Digital SAT. You can purchase it in PDF format through our Patreon. I'll leave a link in the description, along with a promo code that you can use to get 25% off for a limited time only. Now back to the video. Question 11. 10 of William Shakespeare's plays are classified as histories. Although each one of these plays, which include Henry V and Richard III, blank on a single historical figure, specifically an English king, some, such as Henry VI Part 1 and Henry VI Part 2, feature different episodes from the same monarch's life. Now this is a pattern that we've already seen come up twice. Now we know that the blank must include a verb, and anytime you see a verb in the blank, the first thing that you should do is to look for the subject. Yeah, you got it. But that could be a little bit difficult in this case. First, we have a non-essential clause that separates the subject from the verb. I'm talking about the part which include Henry V and Richard III. The sentence becomes a lot easier to analyze if we cross that out, although each one of these plays blank. Now even still, this may be hard for some students. Plays sounds like it's plural, but the subject isn't plays, the subject is each. And each, although it may sound plural, is actually singular, which means we need a singular verb. That means the answer has to be A, focuses. Question 12. In a 2016 study, Eastern Washington University psychologist AEA found that among the study participants who experienced frisson, a physiological response akin to goosebumps or getting the chills, while listening to music, there was one personality trait that they scored particularly blank: openness to experience. Now this is a punctuation question, so let's take a second just to break things down. Up until high on, we do have a complete sentence, but afterwards we don't. Openness to experience, or even if we try ending the sentence earlier, on openness to experience, we still don't have a complete sentence afterwards. That means we can cross off answers A and B. Next, we need to think about the relationship between what comes after and what comes before. The first part of the sentence tells us that there's one personality trait that they scored high on, and the second part gives us that trait, openness to experience. When you're introducing explanation or examples such as this, a common way to do this is with a colon, and that's what answer D gives us, making it the correct answer. Question 13. In the canon of North African literature, Moroccan author D.C.'s 1954 novel, The Simple Past, looms large. A coming-of-age story, a social meditation, and a sober gaze into the dark maw of French colonialism, blank interrogates systemic power with memorable intensity. Now this is a pattern we've seen before. Anytime you have a phrase followed by a comma and a blank, you need to consider what the phrase describes. Now that may be hard to recognize in this case because we don't exactly have one phrase, we actually have three. A coming-of-age story, a social meditation, and a sober gaze into the dark maw of French colonialism. But what do all of these phrases describe? The only possibility is that they describe the novel, which means that's what needs to go in the beginning of the blank. And the only answer that puts the novel at the beginning of the blank is B, C's debut novel. Question 14. On July 23, 1854, a clipper ship called the Flying Cloud entered San Francisco blank. Left New York harbor under the guidance of Captain Josiah Perkins Creasy and his wife, navigator Eleanor Creasy, a mere 89 days and 8 hours earlier. The celebrated ship set a record that would stand for 135 years. Now, as discussed previously, when it comes to punctuation questions, one useful trick is to look at the part before and after the punctuation mark and see whether or not you have a complete sentence. So the first half, a clipper ship called the Flying Cloud entered San Francisco Bay. That is a complete sentence. And the second part, having left New York Harbor under the guidance of these people, a mere amount of time earlier, the celebrated ship set a record that would stand for 135 years. That's also a complete sentence. That means we need some kind of punctuation that can be used to separate complete sentences. Now, answer A may be tempting because the word and can indeed be used to separate complete sentences, but only when it has a comma before it. If we picked answer C, we'd end up with a comma splice, and if we picked answer B, we'd end up with a run-on sentence. That means that the correct answer must be B. Question 15. Planetary scientist B.H. and her colleagues have determined that as much as 25% of the sand on Mars is composed of impact spherules. Those spherical bits of glass form when asteroids collide with the planet, ejecting bits of molten rock into the atmosphere that, after cooling and solidifying into glass, blank back onto Mars's surface. Now this sentence may be a little bit confusing to figure out what's even going on, and I think one of the reasons is because of this phrase that we have surrounded by commas, after cooling and solidifying into glass. So let's get rid of it. It's ejecting bits of molten rock into the atmosphere that blank back onto Mars's surface. Now the word that introduces a relative clause, and that means it's going to need a complete conjugated verb. And there's only one answer here that gives us a conjugated verb, and that's D, rain. Bits of molten rock that rain back onto Mars's surface. Question 16. When external forces are applied to common glass made from silicates, energy builds up around minuscule defects in the material, resulting in fractures. Recently, engineer E.F. of Tampere University in Finland used the chemical blank to make a glassy solid that can withstand higher strain than silicate glass can before fracturing. Now here they've given us another situation where we need to determine the punctuation for names. And as I said before, in almost all cases on the digital SAT, a name is considered essential and should not be offset with any kind of punctuation. This most often comes up with people's names, but it can also be true for non-people, such as we see here. In this case, the name aluminum oxide is considered essential. If we don't have it, the sentence doesn't make sense. We'd be talking about a chemical compound, but it wouldn't be clear which one. Therefore, because it's essential, we don't want to surround it with any punctuation, which means that the answer is going to be D. Question 17. Compared to that of alumina glass, blank, silica glass atoms are so far apart that they are unable to reform bonds after being separated. Now at this point in the video, this should be a very familiar pattern. We have a phrase, compared to that of alumina glass, followed by a comma and blank. Therefore, we need to ask ourselves what this phrase describes. However, in this case, it may be a little bit difficult. If you're not paying careful attention, you might think that the phrase describes alumina glass. Silica glass could be compared to alumina glass. But if we look at the phrase carefully, we'll see that it doesn't say compared to alumina glass, it says compared to that of alumina glass. And the only thing that we can compare to that of alumina glass would be something of silica glass. And the only answer that puts something of silica glass first is D, silica glass's atomic arrangement, which basically means the atomic arrangement of silica glass. Therefore, the correct answer is D. Question 18. In 2018, a team of researchers led by Dr. Caitlin Whalen compiled every available measurement of ocean mixing rates from the past 2 decades. With this novel dataset, the team was able to determine how current-driven mixing varies across blank, and what impact it has on the distribution of heat and nutrients in the ocean. So as you can see, we have another punctuation question. Now the word and can be tricky to punctuate because sometimes it requires a comma before it, and sometimes it doesn't. But the rule is actually quite simple. If the word and is used to separate 2 complete sentences, or it's used to precede the final item in a list of 3 or more, put a comma before it. Otherwise, no punctuation. And in this case, the word and is not introducing a complete sentence or the 3rd item in a list, which means that the correct answer is going to be the one that uses no punctuation. D. Question 19. Researcher Lindsay developed a process for increasing the tensile strength, measured in gigapascals or GPa, of silkworm blank, dissolving and reweaving the silk in a solution of iron metal ions, zinc, and sugar. Z increased the amount of force required to stretch it from approximately 0.5 GPa to 2 GPa. Now, as we've discussed before, when you see a punctuation question, one useful thing to test is whether we have a complete sentence before or after, because that's going to give you a lot of insight about how to punctuate the sentence. Now, the first part of the sentence, researcher Lindsay developed all the way up until silk, is a complete sentence. And the part that we have after, by dissolving ... all the way to the end, that's also a complete sentence. And one of the most common ways to join together complete sentences, or technically to separate them, is to put a period there, which means that the correct answer is going to be D. Let's move on to the final question, question 20. In 2016, engineer Vanessa Galvez oversaw the installation of 164 bioswales, vegetated channels designed to absorb and divert stormwater along the streets of Queens, New York, by reducing the runoff flowing into the city's sewers, blank. Now, if you've made it this far in the video, this question should be pretty simple. It's one of the most common patterns that we've seen. We have a phrase followed by a comma and a blank. So, who or what is reducing runoff flowing into the city sewers? Well, the only possibility is that the bioswales are reducing runoff, which means bioswales needs to come at the beginning of the answer choice. And the only answer choice that puts the bioswales at the beginning is B. The bioswales have mitigated. So that means the correct answer is B. So there you have it. 20 of the hardest grammar questions to ever appear on the digital SAT. For those of you who are trying along at home, how many did you manage to get right? Tell me about it in the comments. One thing I'd like to point out is that although these questions are all considered to be among the hardest ones on the test, there's a lot of commonalities between them. And that's a really important thing, because the digital SAT doesn't test you on all aspects of grammar. It really only tests you on a few, and it tests you on those few elements again and again and again. So if you haven't already seen it, I'd encourage you to check out my video, 5 Essential Grammar Rules for the Digital SAT. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks as always for watching, and good luck on the test.